What is up, weather enthusiasts? I'm your host, Pat's Path Predictor. Let's get right into the weather. Alright, so here's the situation we have for you, ladies and gentlemen. We have some things that we're going to be talking to you about today in regards to potential tropical development. Happy Friday, by the way. Happy D-Day anniversary, first of all, to all our servicemen. But as we continue to talk about the tropics and all that stuff, the main question is starting to pop up. Okay, it's June 6th right now. Hurricane season started 5 days ago. When's the first sign of development going to happen? And we're going to be talking about that today. We're going to be looking at a few things like the Climate Prediction Center, some model runs. We're going to look at some other conditions to look at as well to kind of give you an indicator of potentially where and when I am thinking the first sign of tropical development will take place. It's going to be a bit slow to start, but it's going to ramp up as the season goes on. So let's go ahead and get right into it. So here's the Climate Prediction Center right here for you, ladies and gentlemen. This is week 2 and week 3. This was updated 3 days ago on June 3rd. So the next update will be on June 10th. So we're going to be waiting for that next Tuesday. But here's what we have going on for week 2 and week 3. For week 2, this is valid through June 11th through the 17th. The biggest probability of tropical development remains to be in the Eastern Pacific for the time being, and we're going to be paying attention to that. Matter of fact, I'm going to check the Eastern Pacific just to show you, yeah, we actually have 2 areas of interest over here that we will talk about in just a second, but I do want to start with the CPC and kind of talk about that. In terms of what we're seeing in the Atlantic, looks like the biggest probabilities are in the Gulf region and in the extreme Western Caribbean, extreme Northwestern Caribbean that we're going to want to pay attention to. And then going on to week 3, which is the 18th through the 24th, it mainly shifts to the Bay of Campeche. So we're going to want to pay attention to that. That's what the CPC has going for us right here. Let's go ahead now and talk about these 2 areas of interest that are organizing and developing and actually have pretty high chances of development at this current time. We're going to be talking about this mainly to continue enhancing my forecasting abilities with these systems. So let's go ahead and take a quick look at them. Here's what we have south of southern Mexico. This is disturbance 1, 70% chance of formation in 7 days. Showers and thunderstorms are gradually increasing in association with a trough of low pressure located near the Gulf of Tehuantepec. Environmental conditions appear conducive for additional development, and a short-lived tropical depression is likely to form over the weekend while the system moves generally west-northwestward off the coast of Mexico. Interests in southern and southwestern Mexico should monitor the progress of this system. 60% chance of formation in the next 48 hours. 70% in the next 7 days. So we're going to want to pay attention to that right there. Also watching this area of interest over here offshore of southwestern Mexico as well, which has actually been designated Invest 91E, a low-pressure system located located several hundred miles south of the southwestern Mexico, is gradually becoming better defined, but associated showers and thunderstorms are limited. Gradual development of the system is expected, and a tropical depression is likely to form over the weekend to early part of next week while the system moves generally west-northwestward. 60% probability in 48 hours, 80 in the next 7 days. So we're going to want to pay attention to that as well. What I'm also noticing is the close proximity of these systems right here that we're paying attention to are only a few hundred miles apart. So we're going to have to see how these systems develop, if they commit like a Fujiwara effect or something like that as due to the close proximity. The Fujiwara effect, for those of you who do not know what it is, it's basically a situation where you have two similar intensity types of systems that rotate around each other. So think of it this way. This is system A right here, and this is system B. System A would be rotating further to the south, and system B would be rotating further up to the north, kind of like a wheel a little bit. They do a little bit of a dance, as we like to call it in meteorology, and that rotation can basically throw off the track of it. We're going to want to pay attention to it, and that can also potentially, in this case, affect a lot of people in Mexico, and that's something we absolutely do not want to happen. So that's just another layer that we're going to be paying attention to right here, especially depending on which system will develop. Let's go ahead now and show you what we're looking at on satellite. All right, so this is the satellite imagery. Let's go ahead and shift over the eastern Pacific very quickly, just to kind of give a general gist as to what's going on. So this is the first area of interest around where the convection is right now off the coast of Mexico, and the second area of interest is over here a little bit where that much better area of rotation is showing. We're seeing two areas of rotation. This one's definitely a lot better, and we're also seeing a little bit more convection starting to blow up near the center of circulation. That's something that you're going to want to pay attention to as well. Same with this area. If you want to see more development, you're going to want to see convection blowing up more near the center of it as well, on top of that strong tilt and on top of that strong rotation that we have going on over there. In terms of the health of this system, we're definitely starting to see some more outflow over with the western part of the system, not quite with the eastern system over here, so you're going to want to pay attention to that. But that's the general stuff that you're going to kind of need to look at as a forecaster, and stuff that we're going to continue to pay attention to here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But with that being said, now let's go ahead now and pivot over to the Atlantic and talk about some of the conditions that we're looking at over there. We kind of briefly talked about with this CPC, which kind of intertwined with this Eastern Pacific stuff over here. So let's go ahead now and start talking about some of the conditions that we're paying attention to right now. First thing we're paying attention to actually is going to be the GFS Ensemble right here, and we're going to be shifting over to the worldview and the Madden-Julian oscillation. We talked about this in the last couple of videos, so we're going to talk about this again. Here's what we have going on with the MJO. This is the GFS Ensemble run for today. So here's what we're noticing right here. Starting in about, I would say, a couple of days, we're going to notice more divergence aloft at 200 millibars starting to take shape across much of the Eastern Pacific and Western Hemisphere right here. It really gets more intense, especially as we're looking at like June 12th, the 13th, the 14th, as well as we're paying attention to it. It definitely increases right there. And essentially what we're looking at right here for better tropical development is more divergence aloft. Because if you want convection to develop in the tropics, typically what you're going to want is convergence at the surface and divergence more aloft at 200 millibars in the upper levels. That's mainly to help with the inflow, help with the system to kind of give it the convergence and the energy for it to organize and develop, allow for those air parcels to cool and condense and form clouds. That's typically how convection forms. It's MET 103 type stuff right there. But the MJO really helps enhance it because of the amount of convergence it generates at the surface and the amount of divergence it generates aloft. And this MJO is expected to remain across a lot of these areas for a little bit, going into the 17th to the 18th. Starts to weaken off a little bit right here, but that's what we're looking at right now. Going ahead now and looking at the 7-day averages, it definitely shows a bigger picture, and we're looking at least in the span of 7 days, a lot better of a pattern. I would say this kind of is more or less the average between, It has a little bit less of a graph right here. Let me go ahead and compare this to this. The graph's kind of doubled with both the amount of convergence and divergence compared to the 7-day average right here. So that's why you're seeing those darker shades of green and darker shades of red over there. But ultimately, the point still stands. You're looking at a lot better. Divergence, especially going into into late June across the Caribbean, even pushing into parts of the main development region, which is another area I'm paying attention to. And I do think we need to start shifting our focus over to the main development region, starting in late June, going into early July, going into August, especially, for the following reasons. Number one, we're looking at less Sahara air than what we were initially we were projecting. Number two, the monsoon in the Sahel region is a lot more active than we were anticipating as well. And number three, you're looking at less wind shear in that part of the region, especially as you go into late June. So those are three factors that you're going to want to pay attention to. And we'll go ahead and start with the Sahara Dust right here and shift a little bit. Let's go ahead now and move over to the Atlantic wide and go to true color. Actually, no, not visible shortwave. True color. Here's what we're looking at right here. You can kind of make out the Sahara dust across a lot of the Atlantic, particularly in the MDR right now. That's why conditions aren't favorable for development as of right now in the main development region, but they will be, and I would say relatively soon. And when forecasters say relatively soon, they usually mean, I would say, more than 7 days out. Like soon is like within the next week, and then real soon is like 3 days out. But relatively soon, I would say, is when we're looking at stuff potentially organizing and developing in the MDR, mainly because the Sahara Dust that gets kicked out of there after a little while, it's kind of hard to see on the satellite imagery right now. I'm going to see if we can zoom in to kind of get a better and a closer look as to what we're looking at. See if we can get a closer look at this. Yeah, you can definitely make it a lot clearer. You're seeing more Sahara Dust around the Cabo Verde Islands. You're starting to see blippers of it in the western part of the satellite image that I'm showing you right here. So that's stuff that you're going to want to pay attention to. And looking at the European run as well, at least the European ensemble that is. All right, so here's what we have with the European run right here. Here's what we got with the moisture content. This is relative humidity from between 700 and 300 hectopascals, and this is stuff we're paying attention to generally just to kind of track the moisture and kind of give you an idea of where the Sahara Dust is. So let's go ahead and show you this. Generally pretty unfavorable conditions, especially for the next few days or so across much of the main development region. The ITCZ is definitely blaring up as well, but that's not going to really make that much of an impact right here. But watch as you're looking at this and watch what happens over the next week or so. You're starting to notice less Sahara Dust in the main development region. You're starting to notice more of it in the Caribbean, in the Atlantic Basin, stuff that you're going to want to pay attention to. And it's also a lot more broken up according to the European right here. Especially as you go into late June in the Caribbean and those areas as well. Main development region definitely starts to see a few signs of more moisture moving into it. You're seeing the signs that the Sahel region over here, you're definitely seeing it with the moisture right here of just how active it is. And the Europeans also showing, too, a low-pressure system, like starting to develop over parts of Mali, Mauritania, and Algeria right here. What that's going to ultimately do is it's going to help drive more of that Sahara Dust towards Europe. And we'll have to see how that low-pressure system evolves. But if we do start seeing a stronger low-pressure system, say in late June, early July, that could be a very big indicator for what happens with the Sahara Dust, because a low pressure system that develops in that part of the world will push a lot of the Sahara Dust that moves into the Atlantic Ocean. It'll push it up to Europe, and if it does it too soon, like July or early August and all of that, that is a very bad sign for hurricane season, mainly because it's going to allow for more tropical development. It's going to allow for more opportunities of waves to organize and develop, and the Sahara Dust won't really be that much of a factor anymore compared to what we're seeing. And it does look like that the Sahara Dust is one less fail mode compared to what we were seeing previously. So let's go ahead now and shift to the moisture anomalies right here to kind of also show you another concerning thing I'm looking at right here. We highlighted this yesterday on the Path Predictor channel on yesterday's video. Thanks for the support on that. I really appreciate that. But ultimately, what you're noticing here is, yes, you are seeing drier than average stuff across much of the subtropical and tropical Atlantic right here. But as you go to about 6 days out and more of those tropical waves move off the coast of Africa, look at this. The MDR becomes a lot more moist than average, and a lot of this dryness, at least in relative terms, really starts to calm down. Also noticing a more moist than average Sahara desert region over here. So you're going to want to pay attention to that too, because that could also limit the amount of Sahara dust moving in, on top of the Sahel region becoming more active this year. So ultimately what you're seeing by 15 days out is a much more moist main development region than average. A few dry areas are to be expected as well ultimately because of the Sahara dust. But ultimately, you're noticing a more moist environment, especially for late June, and that is also a very big red flag for me. Looking at this as I'm trying to forecast this hurricane season, and I'm trying to forecast tropical development and when it may initially occur. I do think the month of June is going to be quiet, mainly because of the wind shear, Sahara dust is still a thing, and a few other factors. But ultimately, I would say starting in late June is when you really need to start being paying more attention, for those of you tuning in the Lesser Antilles, for those of you tuning in the Caribbean, and in the in the Mexican region of the Gulf. Those are areas I would mainly highlight for potential late June development, similar to what the CPC has been showing. But that is a very concerning sign for me looking at this. And I'm not even looking at the sea surface temperature waters, which are already pretty primed for development in a lot of areas. But by and large, you're looking at a much more moist environment than average. And this is the European right here. I can also show you the GFS as well. GFS is showing similar stuff as well compared to what we were seeing with the Euro. We're looking at similar returns in terms of the amount of moisture, higher moisture return than average compared to the GFS compared to the European right here. You're looking at that generally a pretty consistent trend right there. So that's something to pay attention to right here. Another thing to pay attention to too is the wind shear. So let's go ahead and show you wind shear. Let's go ahead and show you the wind shear and then the wind shear anomalies right here. Taking a look at those. So here's the wind shear, very much not favorable for tropical development across much of the Atlantic right here. Although I am noticing some pockets of lower wind shear across parts of the main development region that I do want to pay attention to. So that's what we're looking at right here. We're looking at 144 hours out. Basically, you're noticing lower wind shear returns across parts of the MDR. And then starting about 9 days out, you start to see that pocket of very low wind shear across much of the MDR that to pay attention to, as well as a decrease of shear in the Gulf region to pay attention to. So that's what we're looking at right there. You're noticing a decrease of wind shear generally in the tropical regions of the main development region, as well as more fluctuating returns in the Gulf. So that's those are two things that we're paying attention to right here. Looking at the anomalies right here, this is where the juicy stuff comes in for me as a forecaster. What's our wind shear returns looking like? European, similar to the GFS, is actually forecasting for weaker wind shear than average across parts of the MDR right here. So you're going to want to pay attention to that as well. And I also showed you earlier the upper level winds and all of that. They aren't particularly the most favorable in the eastern part of the MDR, but in the western part of the MDR around this time, they're definitely more favorable, and there's definitely a little bit more convergence that we're going to want to pay attention to. So that's a possible area that I'm flagging for development, and we'll have to continue to pay attention to that here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. But regardless of that, you're looking at weaker wind shear returns than average across much of the MDR right here. You're looking at more noise in the Gulf and more noise in the Atlantic Basin. Yes, you do have more shear than average across parts of the Atlantic over here, and a little bit more than average across the Caribbean as well. That's typically to be expected. June, the wind shear typically fluctuates and it's generally unfavorable. Starting in late June and going into early July is when you're going to start seeing that wind shear go up and down, up and down, up and down. And then starting in late July is when that wind shear starts to weaken generally and starts slowly phasing itself out by the time we get to early August. And then that's when things start to ramp up. But ultimately, what am I looking at right here? What is my biggest takeaway from this? You're going to want to take this very seriously. This season, in my opinion, has less fail modes than we did last year. Last year, things got off to a bit of an explosive start with Beryl, and then things started to wind down, started to slow down because of the Sahara Dust that kind of choked out much of the MDR. You're not going to see as much of that this year, and it looks like the wind shear returns in the tropics are also decreasing as well, in part due to a negative neutral phase in the ENSO region. So those are two things that you're going to want to pay attention to, as well as the warm waters, obviously, and we'll continue to update you on all these conditions here on the Pat's Path Predictor channel. I will likely not be uploading a video tomorrow, just a heads up, but I will be streaming tomorrow night at 7 p.m. Central Time, 8 p.m. Eastern Time, so be sure you tune in for that. We're going to be kind of live streaming, talking about conditions, looking at all this data, and kind of analyzing that going forward, so be sure to stay tuned for that. It is tomorrow night at 8/7 Central for those living in the United States. Atlantic Standard Time, it's at 8 o'clock, so be sure you tune in for that. Be sure to like and subscribe if for those you are new. The goal is to get more people engaged with weather. Be sure to join the Storms United Discord server. The link to that is in the end screen if you want to help out, you want to hang out, or you want to just ask us questions. And with that being said, have a wonderful day, guys. Stay safe.